It was a good start, and it was a big one for the plus column for me, because every day that I woke up, I was defying yet another ginormous odd. And then as I continued on with my focus shifting to gratitude, the most amazing thing happened. The most amazing chain of events began that eventually brought me back to life. When I began to feel this sense of gratitude, it changed my perspective. That fear I felt so strongly began to weaken, and things weren't quite so dark as they once had been. Instead of being focused on the negative, I began to see the positive a bit more. And then with that different perspective, it ignited a very powerful thing: hope. It gave some strength to this idea that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And I believe that me focusing on that gratitude, which changed my perspective, which created a lot of hope, eventually led to a tiny little breakthrough. Tiny in movement, but enormous in magnitude. One day I regained the ability to blink. And that little thing that we take for granted, that most people on this call have done countless times since I started speaking, it became my lifeline. Suddenly, I had a way to communicate. 2 blinks for yes, 1 blink for no. And honestly, I'll never forget the moment that I reconnected with my mom. I've always had, in case you couldn't tell, these big brown eyes. So I was just waiting for my mom to turn around and look at me. And it felt like forever, and I'm sure it was, and I'm sure I'm being a little dramatic, but she turned, looked, and stopped dead in her tracks. I was staring at her intensely. And you see, up to this point, I didn't have control of my eyes. So typically my eye muscles were pretty weak, and they would just kind of roll to the back of my head, which is a very attractive look, might I add. They didn't focus at all, and I definitely couldn't follow or track anyone walking across the room. And so she looked at me, and she could tell something was different. I mean, obviously, I'm staring at her with these big eyes. And she came towards me. Our eyes now are locked in on each other, and her hand over her mouth gasping, she asked one simple question: "Victoria, if you can hear me, can you blink?" Guess what I did, folks? I just kept blinking. I'm here, I'm right here. That's how my blinking was what I was trying to say. And in that moment, she burst into tears of joy. And in a singular motion, the weight of the world was lifted from her back. And it was undoubtedly the single most powerful moment I have ever shared with anyone. She grabbed her phone, called my dad, and said so excitedly, "She's back. Victoria is back. She's looking right at me. She's responding, and we're communicating." Now, due to this blinking miracle, I was able to communicate, and slowly but surely, I began to recover. I'll jump ahead now to share that eventually I was able to move more muscles in my face, and then I began to be able to make certain noises, which eventually turned into small words, which combined turned into me talking, which I haven't stopped talking since, in case you couldn't tell. But little by little, I slowly but surely gained more and more movement and began to relearn things like how to talk, how to eat, how to sit up. And you can be sure that with each new tiny bit of regained ability, I grew more and more grateful. This cycle of being grateful for each new tiny step of progress continued to change my perspective. It kept me focused on the positive, which created more hope that things would continue to get better, which, when I mixed in a lot of hard work, eventually led to more and more progress. It was, quite honestly, my breakthrough formula. And it was my roadmap back to life, back to finding a new normal after 4 years in a vegetative state. And this whole cycle of gratitude, perspective change, hope, and effort led me to getting out of that hospital bed and into a wheelchair, where for the first time in years, I was able to move on my own independently. And then one day, my brothers, without my parents' permission, or mine I should add, now this was a couple months after coming out of the vegetative state. So you would think they would be a little fragile with me. Not my brothers. I've got 2 triplets brothers, an older brother. They were like, all right, let's go. So they decided it was time for me to swim again, just like I'd love to do before I'd gotten sick. And so, as the story goes, they strapped a life jacket and threw me in the pool, literally. I'd like to say I went in kicking and screaming, but my legs didn't work and I couldn't kick at the time, but you can be sure I made up for it with screaming. Honestly, I was terrified. I truly was, but they never let go of me. And they got me over that initial fear of drowning. And very quickly, my love of being in the water was rekindled, but also my love of the fact that I could still be free in a sense. I could still get back what was taken away from me. And in the water, I didn't need my legs. I forgot half the time that I was paralyzed in there. And it was a sense of freedom I had not felt in 4 years. So that baptism, if you will, by my brothers led me getting back into the pool and swimming on my own. It led me to competing again as a swimmer, which I had done quite seriously before I'd gotten sick and had always set out these goals of being an Olympian. And 2 years later, it led me to the Paralympics, and it led me to multiple world records and a gold medal and 3 silver medals. Almost 2 years to the day, I might add. And I found that the more I focused on the things I had to be grateful for, instead of dwelling on the things I couldn't do, the more it continued to change my perspective. The more it created hope that things would continue to get better. And eventually that led me to being hired by ESPN as one of the youngest on-air hosts they had ever hired. And I remember my very first on-camera interview was with the legendary Michael Phelps. No pressure, a lot of pressure. That was my first day, and I don't know how to hold a microphone, if you can tell. But at this point, my life had turned around, and I was incredibly blessed to have my mind and most of my body back, and I had this great opportunity going at ESPN, but I still didn't have my legs back, and I always held out hope that maybe someday, just maybe, I would get them back. Just maybe I could get everything that was taken away from me, and that someday I could stand again on my own 2 feet. Honestly, I felt like I just needed one more blink moment. Doctors have never been able to tell us why I regained the ability to blink any more than they can tell us how I got so sick in the first place. And not much more than the blink of an eye, both of those things just happened. And I think at this point, now that I had everything back except my legs, and it defied every single odd except that, I felt like all I needed was one more blink. My parents never forgot the promise they made to me back when I was first grasping everything that had happened to me. They promised me that they would do everything they can to help me get back everything that was taken away from me, and that they would leave no stone unturned. And it was that promise that led us to a world-renowned paralysis recovery center in California. They treat everything from spinal cord injuries to stroke victims to MS, Parkinson's, cerebral palsy, all kinds of neurological conditions. And my mom thought that maybe they could help me. And for the first few weeks of trying, we got nothing out of my legs, nothing at all, not even a twitch. And honestly, it appeared to be a total bust, which of course was quite disappointing. But I knew I couldn't give up. I just needed a blink. We had been there a few weeks, and it was then time to go home back to New Hampshire. And as the story goes, it was on our way home that my mom had an epiphany, if you will. She called my dad, and she simply had this conversation. Larry, do you remember how we talked about how the doctors told us we shouldn't mortgage the house, chasing a 1 in a million chance that Victoria could possibly walk again? Well, remember how we talked about me going to work now that the kids are grown and Victoria's doing well? To which, as you can imagine, my dad nervously said, yes, where are you going with this? My mom continued and said, well, I want to open up a Project Walk here on the East Coast where Victoria could get therapy every day, and we could help all kinds of other people like her who need this sort of treatment. We can turn our family's test into a testimony. I figured out the numbers, and we can afford it if we mortgage the house. By now, you probably know enough about my mother to know she is the kind of woman who doesn't give up. And so, as the story goes, they mortgaged the house, and that's how Project Walk Boston was born. When it opened, I was in there every day, twice a day, training quite literally like an NFL running back, getting ready for their first shot at the pros. And this led to the tiniest flicker of activity in one of my hip flexors. And it was the blink I had been searching and praying for. It was not much, but it was something. And then with that flicker, hope came pouring back. With the help of some amazing trainers, I learned to not only stand again, but I took one step. I learned how to walk, jump, run. Although I can't really stop when I run, fun fact, but all of that, almost 10 years to the day, I started walking again. And all of that hard work led me to Hollywood and being able to do this.
It's the strangest feeling that I get. Dreaming of your lips, kissing my lips, with the world at our fingertips. You know we'll never give it up. You know we'll never give it up. You know we'll never give it up. Never give it up. Ain't afraid to take it on ready. When I know you love to come get me. Let me know who you are. I'm ready, ready. Ain't afraid to take it on ready. When I know you love to come get me. Let me know who you are. I'm ready, 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 ready.
Now, before I go any further, let me just share with you one of the key learnings of my life so far. Listen up, folks. Life is better in pink fringy pants. Who knew? I'm telling you, you put on a pair of hot pink fringies, as you can see from the photo, the tremendous joy in my face. You put on a pair of hot pink fringies, and it's impossible not to smile. You got to try it. I'm telling you, next time you're trying to figure out what to wear, give it a try. Let me know how it goes. I promise you there will be smiles all around and a tremendous perspective change. So, in closing, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. I was very young when my life took a very dramatic and very sudden turn for the worse. And it is truly my sincere prayer that none of you ever go through anything like it. But I can assure you, you will come upon your own challenges in life, some big, some small, but for sure, challenges, obstacles, problems, pandemics, whatever you want to call them, it happens. Part of life. But I have found that the real suffering doesn't come from the challenge or the obstacle itself. It comes from the things we tell ourselves about the consequences, about the future, about what's going to happen because of what already happened. Let me say that again. The real suffering doesn't come from the challenge or the obstacle itself. It comes from the things we tell ourselves about what's going to happen because of what already happened. The real terror for me was not the illness itself. It was the things I was telling myself about the future that were really scary. Would I be locked in forever? Would I ever be able to connect with the outside world again? Would I ever be able to hug my family, tell them that I love them, tell them thank you? So when life hits back at you, when these unwelcomed and unexpected challenges test you, when that happens, you can either let those obstacles pull you down, or you can stop, take a deep breath, and take a moment to find the things in your own life that you have to be grateful for. I assure you that even when it appears you've hit rock bottom, and trust me, I've been a frequent flyer there are always things to be grateful for. When you do that, when you focus on what you still have, you will find it changes your perspective, and that change in perspective creates hope. Hope that tomorrow will be just a bit better than today. And when you take that hope and you mix in your own hard work, lots and lots of hard work, I might add, I believe you will find yourself back on the path to living out your own dreams. And I want to share with you a mantra I developed throughout this whole ordeal, and it's been kind of my guiding light, if you will. And it's something I say to myself pretty much every day. And anytime I'm faced with any kind of obstacle in my life, I repeat it over and over again. And during a time when there are plenty of obstacles in all of our lives right now and a lot of uncertainty. I encourage you to use this if you need it. Whenever something gets in your way, I want you to face it, embrace it, defy it, and conquer it. Thank you guys so much.